Assalamu alaikum. Thank you once again for joining us. With me today is Sayyid Ali Imam and Sayyid Ferdous. If you have been following these shows, which I hope you have been, you will see that we have rebutted Farid's allegations by showing reports from Shia narrations, by showing the strength and consistency of narrations from classical Sunni literary works, which are accepted and verified by so many scholars that it's absolutely ridiculous to try and undermine them by raising these doubts that Farid has raised. And we come to Baladhuri now because, again, Farid has tried to weaken Baladhuri.
Point number 21, there are several issues here. First of all, the author Al-Baladhuri is not even reliable. Secondly, he's quoting from Maslamah bin Muharib, who's an anonymous narrator. And thirdly, he's quoting from Sulyman, Timi, and Ibn Awn. Both of them were late narrators and were not there to witness the event.
Because of his emotional stance on trying to lie about events in history recorded by all sides, simply to try and save this concept of the justice of the companions who they want to hold beyond reproach. It's clouding Farid's judgment and his intellectual veracity when he indulges in such obviously farcical and unsustainable criticism of historical works which the Sunni academic world has itself verified and upheld as absolutely astute and accurate. So, Sayyid Ali Imam, if I can come to you, could you first tell me and the viewers as to who Baladhuri was and a little about the narration in his work, the Ansab al-Ashraf?
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, and thank you for joining us in this ongoing refutation and challenge to Farid Bahraini. Now, with the amount of evidence and information we have provided so far from the books of Hadith and Tarikh, there shouldn't remain any shadow of doubt that this event had a historical basis. See, when we provide a hypothesis of the past events, we're using something called inductive inference. Now, for those who study psychology, you would know it's looking at the information and explaining the best possible outcome to reach a conclusion. Now, with all this pool of information and data, we'll continue to provide more evidence in the upcoming shows, it leaves us with no choice but to explain and determine which would be the best explanation or the best plausible explanation to explain these events. Now, we know Sunnis failed as they've tried to cover in all sorts of ways, including distortion and even denying it outright by accusing Shias of fabricating it, like the Sunni scholar Dr. Salabi, who ironically is advocated by members of Sunni Defense or Discord or whatever they like to call themselves. Now, Shias accept and believe these events did occur and that Ahlul Bayt al-Islam were victims of state-sponsored terrorism. Now, the attempt made by Farid and others of his mindset is to exclude the possibility of such an event even occurring, which is totally absurd. But the reality is it's widely accepted from the historians and even narrated by historians themselves, and from the earliest generations who were closer to the event, and some of them even included those from their progeny, which we will touch later on in the show. Therefore, there's no contradiction in what's been documented, as there is a common theme, unless, of course, there's been distortion, as we've seen in the previous shows. Now, it would have been a contradiction if these events cannot be established based on the evidence, and since no Sunni scholar of the past denied it or offered a counter-narrative, except for censoring it, it leaves us with no other conclusion that these events did happen. Now, another desperate attempt by Farid is to suggest one of the most notable Sunni historians, Baladhuri, is not reliable. This is totally unbelievable. To what extent people would go to even deny what their own scholars have documented and labeled them as untrustworthy, which would essentially show how detrimental it would be to even acknowledge or report such information. So let us now come to this report and see if it's in line with what's already been covered in the previous shows. So Baladhuri reports in his book Ansab al-Ashraf, volume 2, page number 268. So he narrates it from Al-Mada'ini, who is a famous historian, from Maslamah ibn Muharib, again a famous historian, Sulyman al-Timi, who is a Tabi, and from Ibn Awn. who again is another Tabi, that Abu Bakr requested that Ali to give allegiance, and Ali didn't answer the pledge. So Umar came with torch fire, and Fatima received him at the door. And Fatima has said, "Oh, Ibn Khattab, do you want to burn my door?" He said, "Yes." And this is stronger in terms of following what your father came with, meaning the religion of our father. That is, giving bay'ah to Abu Bakr is following what the Prophet has recommended. And Ali came and gave his pledge and said, "I was planning not leaving my home until I compiled the Holy Quran."
Sayyid Ferdous, did you want to comment on this tradition before I move on?
Thank you, Sayyid. Yes, it's very interesting narration also, as you read. So it has some more details about the incident and what happened actually. Important thing is that, we see that Umar just actively brought a torch, a burning torch with him to burn the door of the family of the Prophet. So it was just not a dry threat like we saw in the other traditions. So in the other traditions that we read, like Ibn Abi Shayba and others, we saw that he was threatening, but the narration was not mentioning that they had really fire with them, or at least the ones that we read from Ibn Abi Shayba didn't have that. So here we have that the important detail that he was actually actively, Umar himself was carrying a torch of fire. And the other thing is that he actually displaying game of that they usually do about the other tradition of Ibn Abi Shayba, that he threatened them to burn the house upon them or upon you. It was not upon you, it was upon them, and so on. This is not existent in this tradition. He directly threats. Fatima al-Zahra mentions that are you burning my door? So explicitly she mentions her the door of her house, and Umar just simply says yes, and that's something that makes Islam stronger, as he claims. So, and other detail is that, and we see also here again that the part about pledging of allegiance is mujmal. It's very brief. It doesn't have any details that it's basically covering up of what actually, how it happened, how the allegiance itself happened. In any case, we also, it has another extra part which says that Amir al-Mu'minin was sitting at home because he was collecting Qur'an. I think we had some shows separate from this one, which was particularly about collecting of Quran by Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam. If anyone wants, you can watch those, at least 2 episodes on this channel. Anyways, but the content, as we see, has some important details and also some other parts which are again empty or very brief and does not give any details, like the pledging of allegiance, how it happened. And as we said at the multiple shows that we had till now, that there is a concept of censorship and hiding the truth and possibly destroying it, like Dhahabi says, that almost all of their scholars stick to and act upon. The only problem is that they have with this, that they do not agree upon which part they want to remove. So some of them remove some parts and leave the other parts, and some others remove that part that the other has mentioned and mention the part that the other one has removed. So that way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually gave us these details if we bring these traditions together, these repairs together, and fill the puzzle. To create the image that they are trying to actually distort and hide. So this is the only way. And as we said in the multiple shows that we had, that it's because of these dishonesty of their scholars. The only way is to just look at all these traditions and see what they have in common, which parts have been removed, and see other places, other books of theirs, to see those details that have been removed by the others, to find out what was actually going on there. So yeah, I think thank you very much.
So let's come to the chain of transmission of this report. And this report has come via 4 people, including Baladhuri himself, which we will inshallah get to. So Al-Mada'ini, and what's said about Al-Mada'ini in the book Siyar al-Alam al-Nubla by Al-Dhahabi, volume 10, page number 400 and 401, person number 113. And it was said concerning him, he was an alama, somebody very knowledgeable, a hafiz, a scholar in hadith, and he was truthful. And he was a historian, and he's written many books, and he had amazing knowledge on history and on Maghazi, battles and lineages, and on the history of Arabs. And he was truthful in what he's narrated, and his chains are very close. And Yahya ibn Ma'in says he's trustworthy, and he's trustworthy, and he's trustworthy. So he was so trustworthy, it wasn't enough for Yahya ibn Ma'in to say it once. He actually said it 3 times. So this is the first narrator, Al-Mada'ini, and he is somebody who's a historian, praiseworthy, a scholar, an expert in history. Now we'll come to the next narrator, and his name is Maslamah ibn Muharib. Now it's interesting that our opponents actually raised an objection, and I think it's important that we show this clip very briefly now, just to show the deception when it comes to the attempt to try to deny these events.
Secondly, he's quoting from Maslamah bin Muharib, who's an anonymous narrator.
He quotes a narration in أنصاب الأشراف.
يقول هذا الوهابي أن عمر قال أحرق عليهم ولم يقل عليكم. طيب تفضل، هذا الحديث يقول فيه عمر أحرق عليكم، كحل بها عيونك. أنساب الأشراف البلادوري الجزء الثاني. المدائني عن مسلمة بن محارب عن سليمان التيمي وعن ابن عون أن أبا بكر أرسل إلى علي يريد البيعة فلم يبايع، فجاء عمر ومعه قبس فتلقته فاطمة على الباب، فقالت فاطمة: يا ابن الخطاب، أتراك محرقا علي بابي؟ قال: نعم، وذلك أقوى فيما جاء به أبوك.
This report is weak because of the anonymity of Maslamah bin Muharib in the chain.
Al-Dhahabi mentions in his book Mizan al-I'tidal, volume 5, page number 507. And it's said about him that the scholars have said that he was a hafiz. And then it says, whoever wants history reports, then they should take it from a list of people, and he's included as well, Maslamah ibn Muharib, meaning that if people want to take reports related to history, Maslamah ibn Muharib is somebody who's praiseworthy and somebody who is dependent upon them. Ibn Hibban has authenticated him in his book Al-Thuqat, volume 7, page number 490. And he says Maslamah ibn Muharib, and he narrates from his father Mawiyah, and Ismail ibn Ulay has narrated from him. So Maslamah ibn Muharib is a trustworthy narrator, and there's authentication for him from Al-Dhahabi and also now from Ibn Hibban. So Al-Bukhari in his Tarikh al-Kabir, volume 7, page number 387, page number 1685, mentioned the brief biography of Maslamah ibn Muharib and who he narrated from. He narrated from his father, and you can see in the chain of transmission it goes back to the Prophet. Now, what does it mean when Al-Bukhari mentions a narrator in his Tarikh al-Kabir? Does it mean that it's a form of condemnation or praise? Let's have a look. Thanvi in his book Al-Ala al-Sunan, volume 19, page number 223, says, whoever Bukhari mentions in his Tarikh and does not weaken them, as we've seen with Maslamah ibn Muharib, then they are trustworthy. So there you go. Anyone who Bukhari does not criticize in his book of Tarikh is somebody trustworthy. Because he used to only mention the weakness and the status of weak narrators explicitly, as stated by Ibn Taymiyyah. And this has been mentioned in Nail al-Awtar. And by the way, in the footnote, Stucky Usmani mentioned that it's not to be confused with Ibn Taymiyyah al-Harani, but rather Ibn Taymiyyah's grandfather. And there's a big discussion there about this, but you can see similar statement that whenever Bukhari mentions somebody and there's no criticism about them, then generally that person is deemed trustworthy and authentic. So now we've got 3 scholars who've and others who've authenticated Maslamah ibn Muharib. Let's come to the third narrator, and this is from Sulyman ibn Tarkhan and Dhahabi, saying in Siyar al-Alam al-Nubla, volume 6, page number 195 to 196, person number 92. And he says his name, Sulyman ibn Tarkhan, and the Imam, the Sheikh of Islam. What's interesting is Shu'bah said that I haven't seen more truthful person than Sulyman al-Timi, who's Sulyman ibn Tarkhan. And he mentions about the fact that whenever he heard the hadith of the Prophet, his color used to change. And what's interesting is this word here now. Shu'bah says the doubt of Ibn Awn and Sulyman al-Timi is certainty. Ibn Awn is actually the next narrator who we're going to come to. So here we've got praise of 2 narrators immediately. We've got praise of Sulyman al-Timi, who is the narrator under discussion, and also Ibn Awn. So here's this attestation from Shu'bah about 2 of these people who are on this chain, and we will inshallah get to the 4th person, who is Ibn Awn. So far, as you can see, the people who I've mentioned in the chain of transmission are extremely authentic. They include historians, and Imams of Al-Sunnah have generally praised them. Now we'll come to Ibn Awn. Al-Safadi, in his book Al-Wafiyat bil-Wafiyat, volume 17, page number 211-212, person 6283, and he mentions the status of Ibn Awn, and he says that he was a Hafiz and the Imams of knowledge. This is from Khalid ibn Qurra, who said that we were amazed by seeing the piety of Ibn Sirin, who was a Tabi'i. But when we saw Ibn Awn, we forgot about him. Allahu Akbar. So this goes to show you the status of Ibn Awn and what position he was. For people like Ibn Sirin, who was considered as someone who's pious, that even Khalid ibn Qurra said that I totally forgot about Ibn Sirin, who he was. And Shu'bah, the statement which I've mentioned before about Shu'bah that says that the doubt of Ibn Awn is more dear to me than the certainty of others. It is possible that he has heard from a group of companions and he was trustworthy and he has narrated many narrations, and he was Uthmani. Again, Dhahabi mentioned something very interesting in his book Siyar al-Alam Nubla, volume 6, page number 365. He says, Hisham said, my eyes have not seen anyone like Ibn Awn. And then he says, Ibn Mubarak said, I've not seen anyone superior to Ibn Awn. And Shu'bah said, the doubt of Ibn Awn is more dearer to me than the certainty of others. So the doubt of Ibn Awn is more dearer to me than the certainty of others. So this goes to show you the level of reliability of this person. Whose statement should we take here? Shu'bah, who says the doubt of Ibn Awn is more dear to me than the certainty of others, or what Farid says? Now we've covered the chain of transmission of this report, and in conclusion, there can be no doubt that this report is authentic. In terms of the chain of transmission, Al-Mada'ini is believed to be somebody who's trustworthy historian. Maslamah ibn Muharib is considered reliable by Ibn Hibban. Al-Dhahabi's teacher has affirmly quotes it, and Sulyman and Ibn Awn are narrators of Bukhari and Muslim. And it's true, Ibn Awn did pass away approximately 150 years after this event. However, it's still valid and it's important proof due to his high status among our opponents. And according to the science of hadith, the mursal of a tabi is still considered as proof according to the majority of Sunni scholars. Therefore, it's not expected from somebody like Ibn Awn and others who have transmitted this report to narrate something which would essentially expose his holy figures, unless, of course, it was a known fact. Now, Al-Mada'ini adds important value to this chain because it's said that he's believed upon and a trustworthy historian, which makes us comfortable in relying on this narration, especially when it comes through such controversial topics. So it's extremely bizarre that people like Farid are trying to deceive his fan base into believing that this report has no historical value. Well, we know that he rejected the credentials of Baladhuri, which we'll get to inshallah, but in terms of the chain of transmission, it's a very authentic report. So let's come to now the status of Baladhuri and what the scholars have said about him. Al-Dhahabi mentions about him in volume 13, page number 162, person number 96, and he says, Alama, meaning he was a knowledgeable scholar. And he was a scholar of literature. The author and his full name, Abu Bakr Ahmad ibn Yahya ibn Jabir al-Baghdadi, al-Baladhuri, the author of the big history book. So this person is an Alama. He was a knowledgeable scholar. Even Dhahabi confirms this. And according to our Twitter friend, he's unreliable. So that was a Dhahabi praising the books of Baladhuri. Now, in the following report, we have Ibn Hajar Asqalani attesting Baladhuri in terms of what he narrated. And he says Al-Baladhuri narrated a good chain of transmission on the authority of Hafs ibn Abi al-As. This is in his book An-Nasaba, volume 2, page number 86, page number 1770. So here is a report narrated by Baladhuri himself and Ibn Hajar Asqalani saying it's a good chain of transmission. Now it's interesting because I did come across another report from Al-Hakim himself in which he has also authenticated Baladhuri, and there was many other Sunni scholars, but sufficient is Ibn Hajar Asqalani to show you. So Yaqut al-Hamawi mentions in his book Mujam al-Udba, volume 2, page number 53, and he mentions the name of Baladhuri, Ahmad ibn Yahya, and he says he was a genealogist and a mutqin, meaning he was accurate. Ibn Salah, he says, Ibn Abi Hatim said that a person who's mutqin means is somebody who's accurate. And his narrations are to be taken as proof. And this, for this very reason, the likes of Ibn Hajar Asqalani accepted his report as being reliable. Now we'll come to Dr. Akram al-Umari, who's a professor at the Islamic University of Medina Munawwara in the Department of Islamic History. So you can see this person is not just some random person sitting on Twitter. He's an expert. He's an expert and a professor in Islamic University of Medina Munawwara. And he is a major researcher in the areas of the Sunnah and generally the life, the seerah of the Holy Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him. I think I've mentioned in the previous show as well that he's actually a professor present in the University of Qatar. So he says now about Baladhuri in his book Asr al-Khulafa Rashida, page number 15 to 16. So in his book, he mentions the name of Baladhuri in the year he passed away. And he continues to say, Al-Baladhuri is considered the most significant Muslim historian after Tabari in terms of his vast knowledge that he's recorded and the historic errors that he's covered. Rather, his book Ansab al-Ashraf, same book that we're talking about with this particular report, is better selection of reports, and it has a clearer chains and is more in harmony with the reports of trustworthy and reliable narrators compared to Tariq al-Dabri itself. So this is the status of Baladhuri, and this is the status of the book Ansab al-Ashraf. And yet you have people like Farid who says Baladhuri is unreliable. Like, who is Farid? Do we take the position of people who are experts in history, the Imams of Al-Sunnah, who've praised his books, who've praised his status, who've acknowledged he was a man of caliber? And it's shocking, it's disturbing that you got people like Farid who just say this person is completely unreliable, totally disregard him. And then he carries on and he says, and comparing his narrations with the narrations of others like Ibn Sa'd and Khalifa, we realize that his narrations are in agreement with either Hasan or Sahih. So even according to what he reports, a lot of these traditions are either Hasan or Sahih that have been recorded in the books of Sunnah and history. Thus, whenever we see weakness or oddness in his narrations, its burden is upon the narrators from whom he has narrated it and not upon him. So meaning that they would actually not doubt him as what he narrates. But if he's heard a report, there must be a discrepancy within that chain of somebody else. Now, we've already proven that that report is authentic anyway. And if people want to discredit the report, then essentially they need to be attacking, the Tabi'is who narrated it. So if you want to attack them, then by all means you should. That's up to you. You consider them the Salaf and the best of generations. But anyway, And he says he has selected the narrations about the Islamic wars and trials from trustworthy scholars of hadith and from the teachers of Bukhari and Muslim, and in their Sahih books, like Afan ibn Muslim, and then he mentions the other scholars who he's narrated from. So there you have it, brothers and sisters. And this is the status of Baladhuri, his book. We've already validated the report. All the narrators are trustworthy. I'll leave it to you to decide whether this person's unreliable and whether his works are unreliable, or whether he's somebody we should trust, or whether these narrations that I've presented, whether it is authentic in terms of the chain of transmission. Thank you very much, Sayyid Nazim Shah. I will pass it back to you.
Thank you, Sayyid Ali Imam. Extremely helpful. And what can we say? We have on one side the weight of Sunni scholarship testifying to Baladhuri's veracity and reliability. And on the other side, we have Farid Barini, who is trying to say that Baladhuri is not reliable. Sure, I think Farid would need to convince Sunni academia before he could actually substantiate that claim that Baladhuri is not reliable at all. And thank you for explaining the chain of narrators and their status amongst Sunni academics and Sunni men of knowledge. Thank you also for clarifying that it was actually a number of Dhahabi from various chains of transmissions who've narrated this, which actually begs the question then, if Farid is going to question whether reports from Dhahabi are acceptable, then what does he actually accept? Because that's the majority of the reports in Sunni academic works, which will be relegated to the realms of doubt and be considered weak. The number of reports from these narrators and the number of Sunni academics and scholars who have accepted the reports of Dhahabi and relied on those reports to build creed and history and fiqh would all then be rendered useless. So either Farid is destroying Sunnism to safeguard the status and credibility of the companions involved in this event, or he's going to have to accept that something happened, and we can come to that at the end. But Sayyid Ferdous, if I could come to you, in relation to this narration, is this actually found in any other works? Is there anything for us to show that this narration is corroborated in any other works?
Thank you, Sayyid. Yes, so we saw a very interesting narration indeed, and also the chain is also very interesting because, as Sayyid Ali also mentioned, there are 3 generations of reliable historians narrating this from 2 tabi'in, major tabi'in, who were very praised, and even it was said about them that even their doubt is more valuable than certainty of others. So, and also the chain is reliable. So what can you say about it? You cannot object to the reliability of the narrators of that narration. But the question is, as we also discussed in the last shows, that the mursal narrations, they accept it. So they also differentiate between the good mursal and the mursal which is not acceptable. So how can you not accept the mursal of tabi'in, like the ones that we have mentioned here, like Ibn Aoun and Sulyman at Timi? So of course, for them, these are great signs of reliability of narrations if they come from such high status tabi'in, of course. And also history, we saw that there are scholars like Ahmed ibn Hanbal says that it's most of history of Islamic history is based on these mursal narrations. So if you dismiss them, you you have destroyed the 80 or 90% or more than that of the entire Islamic history. So, but it's very usual from the polemicists of today, the Salafists especially, to just object on the chains of narrators and so on. But they do not know that by this, as you said, Sim Nazim Shah, they're just destroying the other fields, because those scholars, they appear in other chains. They appear in the chains of books, entire books, like we mentioned in the last show, that Abu Bakr al-Jawhari, for example, that he says is not a reliable unknown person. We saw that the entire book of Ibn Shabba has been narrated through him. So if they object to those people, they have to burn all these books that they have also. As they say, someone who's drowning, he will just catch the next thing that he can hold to, so to speak. Yeah, this is the method of hide and seek, or however you call it, that whenever they like, they accept the narrations of some narrators, and they try to authenticate that narrator, and whenever they don't like the content of the narration, they object to the narrator. This is very common, and also we can see this in the very good example of this is that one that I want to present is a narration from about Saqifa from Al-Waqidi, the very famous historian. However, there is difference of opinion about him. So they call him Imam in Maghazi. In history, is an Imam, someone reliable, whose narrations and statements have been used all over the place in the books of history and Maghazi and so on. And on the other hand, a lot of their scholars also weaken him, and a group of others who authenticate him. We will see that. So whenever they like his narrations, they try to say he is an Imam in Maghazi, so that's why we take this narration from him. And other times, when they don't like the narration that he narrates, then they object to him and say so and so has weakened them. So we have here the book Kitab Al Riddah, which is a book from Al-Waqidi, and has been narrated by, as we see here in the cover, by Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Asim al-Kufi from him. And it mentions at the beginning of the book, page 27, the chain of narrators, that from whom the book has been narrated, and also Al-Waqidi has narrated from Ibn Ishaq, from Yazid ibn Ruman and Sa'd ibn Kaysan. These chains also appear in other books like Tabaqat ibn Sabit, who is also a direct student of Al-Waqidi. So a lot of the content also can be found, content of this book can be found in other books, as the annotator of the book, also Dr. Yahya Jaburi, also says. In any case, this narration does not have anything about the burning threat to burning, and the what it's called, the other details that we saw, some of the details that we presented till now. But it has some more interesting, gives us more insight, gives us more which fills the gaps that we saw in the previous narrations. So, and also this also has some ambiguity in some parts, which we will see it in other narrations. As I said, you have to kind of look at all these narrations and fill the entire puzzle. So. And solve the puzzle, because otherwise you will always get some piece of information and others which are not reliable, or has been later additions, or has been distorted based on the ideology, dogma of which can hurt their kind of aqidah. So. Narration is very long, which is about the entire incident of from these multiple narrators of Al-Waqidi, from not one person, but it's also his habit that Al-Waqidi used to, most of the time, mix narrations together and then narrate it as one narration. The reason of this was because, as you see, history is a connected chain of events, and you might not have the same entire thing, have the same witness for all these. And it also, in their books, they also say that Al-Waqidi, his students, some days told him, narrate to us every incident by the chain of narrators for that incident. So do not combine all the chains together and narrate one story. Just narrate it like the scholars of hadith. And he did it for a few days or one day. And they, after that, they came back and said, this is too difficult for us. One chapter has now become like a book. It's getting too long. Do it like you did it before. Combine the entire history and then give it to us in one piece, so to speak. And that was also his habit, so to speak, as if you see his narrations and so on in his other books like Al-Maghazi and also the this book, which is Al Riddah, and other books. Anyways, and then narrations. The entire history, as I said, the entire narration comes from multiple narrators. And then it talks about the entire incident of Saqifa and so on, how what happened in the Saqifa itself. And then here I want to mention what happened, the parts which involve the family of the Prophet and so on. So here we have, starting from Abdurrahman ibn Auf. So it says, after the pledge of allegiance to Abu Bakr in Saqifa, interestingly, Abdurrahman ibn Auf comes to a group of Ansar and talks to them and encourages them to go and pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr. So this is after Saqifa. After the pledge of Saqifa and the Saqifa itself, which a group of Ansar and Muhajirin like Abu Bakr, Umar, and others were gathered. So, and interestingly, also we want to mention that Abdurrahman ibn Auf, as we discussed in previous shows, his sons have narrated some very interesting details of the Saqifa. So here we see himself, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, also belonging to the party of Abu Bakr. He was just working to get people to pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr. So he was actively involved in the entire party. It's no surprise that his sons have narrated so much details of the Saqifa, because their father was an active person in these incidents. So here Abdurrahman ibn Auf comes to a group of Ansar and talks to them and says that we know that you have great merits and so on, but there is no one among you like Abu Bakr, Umar, Osman, and Abi Ubaidah and so on. So get up and go pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr. And from among them, Ansar, then Zayd ibn Arqam, the famous companion who has narrated the narration of Thaqalain and so on, and other narrations, he stood up and said to Ibn Auf that we do not deny what you said, but from among us, there are also very famous companions like Sa'd ibn Ubadah, the chief of Khazraj, Sa'd ibn Mu'az, who was chief of Aus, and others, Ubay ibn Ka'b, the top reciter of Qur'an, and others and so on. Zayd ibn Arqam then mentions a list of great companions of the Prophet from among Ansar, and mentions their merits, and so on. And then Zayd ibn Arqam says that يا ابن عوف لولا أن علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه وغيره من بني هاشم اشتغلوا بدفن النبي وبحزنهم عليه فجلسوا في منازلهم ما تمع فيها من تمع. So Zayd ibn Arqam says to Abdurrahman ibn Auf, if Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam and others of the family of the Prophet, Bani Hashim, were not busy with the burial of the Prophet and with their grief upon the Prophet, and the fact that they sat in their houses and they were busy with the ceremonies and so on, with the funeral, no one would dare to become greedy to take this position of the Khilafah, of the successorship of the Prophet. So here we have another indication that the Ansar, or some of the Ansar, they knew the status of Amir al-Mu'minin. Then they knew he was the true successor of the Prophet. So Zayd ibn Arqam, for example, here mentions that directly. We have mentioned before that some of the Ansar, even at the Saqifa directly, also said the same thing, that they do not want to pledge allegiance except to Amir al-Mu'minin. So, and then Zayd ibn Arqam says to Abdurrahman ibn Auf, says, وَلَا تُحَجَّ عَلَى أَصْحَابِكَ مَا لَا تَقُومُ لَهُ. So he says, do not encourage people to give your companion, referring to Abu Bakr, the position that he is not fitting for that position. And then it says that Abdurrahman ibn Auf then left and could not get them encouraged to stand up and go pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr, and then and said what that group of Ansar told him to Abu Bakr. And then Abu Bakr, interestingly, says that you shouldn't have done that, because he says that because you went just to a group of people from among whom they've already pledged allegiance to me. So Abu Bakr is afraid that some more conflicts arises, because not all of people had pledged allegiance yet to him. So he says that it's enough that some of the famous companions of from among Ansar have already pledged allegiance to me in Saqifa. So you shouldn't have done. You shouldn't have make the arrest of them, so to speak, to group together and create problem and so on. And also, of course, Abdurrahman ibn Auf also mentions that Zayd ibn Arqam said that if it wasn't for Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam sitting at his home, and if he wasn't busy, we would have given allegiance to him and not to you. So for that reason, then it says that Abu Bakr sent to Ali alayhi salam and called him to pledge allegiance. Interestingly, here we see that it just makes it again mujmal. It's very brief. How he called Amir al-Mu'minin to come to pledge allegiance, we saw that those details in the other narrations. As we see, they always distort some part of the narration, and they do not, or they make it brief and do not put the entire incidents or information of what happened in the narrations. So here it just says that he called him, and then Amir al-Mu'minin came and then sat down and then asked them, why did you call me? And then Umar says to him, دعوناك للبيعة التي قد جمع عليها المسلمون. And then Umar said to Amir al-Mu'minin that we called you to pledge allegiance, that the rest of the Muslims have already done, so you're the only ones that are remaining. And then Ali alayhi salam then says, Ya Aula, إنما أخذتم هذا الأمر من الأنصار بالحجة عليهم والقرابة لأبي بكر. So Amir al-Mu'minin says to Umar and to other people gathered there, that you people, Abu Bakr, Umar and his party, you took this position with the argument against Ansar that Abu Bakr was close to the Prophet. So he was close because he was from the same tribe, so to speak. He was close to the Prophet in terms of he was a relative of the Prophet, so to speak. And Amir al-Mu'minin says, لأنكم زعمتم أن محمدا منكم. Says that you claimed that because you claimed that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa is from among you. فأعطوكم المقادة وسلموا إليكم الأمر. And for this argument, because of this argument, Ansar gave you this position, and they gave it up to you. And Amir al-Mu'minin says then, وأنا أحتج عليكم بالذي احتججتم به على الأنصار. And Amir al-Mu'minin says, I now argue with you with the same argument that you presented to Ansar, by saying نحن أولى بمحمد حيا وميتا. We are more deserving more closer to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his life, during his lifetime, and at his death. We are the closest people to him. لأننا أهل بيته, because we are his family. وأقرب الخلق إليه, and we are the most close people to him. فإن كنتم تخافون الله فانصفونا. So if you fear Allah, then you should be fair to us. وأعرفوا لنا في هذا الأمر ما عرفته لكم الأنصار. And recognize for us this position, like Ansar recognizes it for you, for that argument that you are closer to the Prophet, we are from the same tribe and so on. Now we are closer than you to the Prophet, we are from his family. How can you make that argument against Ansar and leave us out? Because we are closer than you, so you're more deserving of this position than you. So, and then says that Umar said to him then, إِنَّكَ أَيُّهَا الرَّجُلُ لَسْتَ بِمَتْرُوكٍ. And Umar then says to Amir al-Mu'minin, oh man, you will not be left alone, or you will not be left free to go until you pledge allegiance. كَمَا بَيَا غَيْرُكَ. Like the rest of the people that have pledged allegiance. You have to pledge allegiance. Then Ali alayhi salam then said, إِذَنْ لَا أَقْبَلُ مِنْكَ وَلَا أُبَايِعُ مَنْ أَحَقُّ بِالْبَيْعَةِ مِنْهُ. So Amir al-Mu'minin says that then I will not accept that, and I will not pledge allegiance to a person from whom I'm more deserving to be pledged allegiance to. So he is actually, Abu Bakr should come and pledge allegiance to me, not the other way around. And then Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah then says that by Allah wa al-Hasan, we know that you deserve this position because of your merits and your history and also your closeness to the Prophet and so on. However, people have already pledged allegiance to this old man, referring to Abu Bakr as old man Sheikh, and then says that فَرْضِ بِمَا رَضِيَ بِهِ الْمُسْلِمُونَ. So you should be content with what the Muslims have already been content and happy with. And then Ali alayhi salam then says, Ya Abu Ubaidah, Anta Amina of al-Ummah. You are the trustee of this Ummah. This is also a fabricated narration, but it has its own place to discuss. Anyways, this narration has this part. And then Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam says that فَاتَّقِ اللَّهَ فِي نَفْسِكَ. Fear Allah about yourself. فَإِنَّ هَذَا الْيَوْمَ لَهُ مَا بَعْدَهُ مِنَ الْأَيَّامِ. Because this day has other days which comes after it. So Amir al-Mu'minin is afraid of the future of Islam and says, do not do that, because you'll create many more problems if you do this. It's not just today, it will come other generations, other centuries, till the day of judgment. Everything will be changed. And then Amir al-Mu'minin says, وَلَيْسَ يَنْبَغِي لَكُمْ أَن تُخْرِجُوا سُلْطَانَ مُحَمَّدٍ مِنْ دَارِهِ وَقَعْرِ بَيْتِهِ إِلَى دُورِكُمْ وَقُعُورِ بُيُوتِكُمْ. That it is not fitting for you to take out the leadership or the rule of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam from his house, and from the depth of his house and his home, and bring it to the depths of your houses, and make your houses, so to speak, the places of leadership. فَفِي بُيُوتِنَا نَزَلَ الْقُرْآنِ. Because in our houses the Qur'an has been revealed. وَنَحْنُ مَعْدَنَ الْعِلْمِ وَالْفِقْهِ وَالدِّينِ وَالسُّنَّةِ وَالْفَرَائِضِ. Because we are the mines or the cores of knowledge and fiqh, jurisprudence, and deen and sunnah and obligatory other fara'id. وَنَحْنُ أَعْلَمُ بِأُمُورِ الْخَلْقِ مِنْكُمْ. And we are more knowledgeable about the affairs of people, problems of people. We are more knowledgeable about it than you. فَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا الْهَوَى فَيَكُونَ نَصِيبُكُمْ الْأَخَسَّ. Do not follow your evil desires, so that your share from it will be very despicable. Meaning, in this world and also in hereafter, of course. And then after that, Bashir ibn Sa'd al-Ansari, the companion of the Prophet, spoke and said, "O Abul Hasan, by Allah, if the people have heard these statements from you before they pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr, no two people would disagree upon you, and all people would have pledged allegiance to you. However, you preferred to stay at your house, and you did not witness what happened at Saqif and so on. So people thought that you don't need this position. You're not after leadership and so on. And now we see you that you do not want to pledge allegiance to this old man," referring to Abu Bakr, and you are now saying these statements. And then Ali alayhi salam says, "Wayhak ya Bashir, woe to you, O Bashir. Was it fitting for me to leave the Messenger of Allah at his house and just leave his body at his house and not bury him and not take care of the Islamic rituals of his burial, and come out and fight and dispute about his successorship? Is this the thing that a Muslim should do? This is what you expect from me?" So, and then it says that Abu Bakr then came and said, Abu Bakr then addressed them and said, "O Abul Hasan, إني لو علمت أنك تنازعني في هذا الأمر ما أردته ولا طلبته." It claims that allegedly Abu Bakr said that, "Oh, Abul Hasan, if I knew that you would dispute with me about this position, I wouldn't have wanted it, and I wouldn't have followed it and tried to become the successor or the leader of the Ummah. However, وَقَدْ بَايَعَ النَّاسِ. However, people have pledged allegiance to me anyways. فَإِنْ بَايَعْتَنِي فَذَلِكَ ذَنِّي بِكَ." So if you pledge allegiance to me, then that's what we expect from you. وإن لم تبايع في وقتك هذا وتحب أن تنظر في أمرك لم أكرهك عليه. And if you don't want to pledge allegiance at this time, and you want to think about it, I will not force you to pledge allegiance now. فانصرف راشدا إذا شئت. So now you can go if you want now. So it says then فانصرف عليا عليه السلام إلى منزله فلم يبايع حتى توفيت فاطمة صلوات الله عليه. And Ali alayhi salam then went to his house and did not pledge allegiance until Fatima al-Zahra salamun alayha passed away. ثم بايع بعد 75 ليلة من وفاتها. Then after 75 days of her death, then Amir al-Mu'minin pledged allegiance allegedly. And then he says that it has been also said that he pledged allegiance after six months. And then a very interesting comment from Al-Waqidi, from the author. He says that فَهَذَا أَكْرَمَكَ اللَّهُ مَا كَانَ مِنْ سَقِيفَةِ بَنِي سَعْدَةَ. So he to his student to whom he's narrating this narration, says that this was the story of Saqif of Bani Sa'da وَهَذَا رِوَايَةُ الْعُلَمَاء. And this is the narration of the report of scholars. وَلَمْ أَرَدْ أَنْ أَكْتُبْ هَؤُنَا شَيْئًا مِنْ زِيَادَةِ الرَّافِضَةِ. And I did not want to write here the additions of Rafida. So the Rafida, they have some additions about the Saqifa, which I did not add in this report. So I did not mention those. I just mentioned the reports of scholars, Sunni scholars. فيقه هذا الكتاب في يد غيرك فتنسب أنت إلى أمر من الأمور والله يقي. So he says basically that I did not mention the additions of Rafida because so that this book does not fall into the hands of somebody else, and they accuse you the student of of the author, to be a Rafizi or a Shi'i or a liar or whatever, like they usually do. So, and likewise, the ones that we presented in previous shows from Al-Jawhari, for example, and Ibn Abi al-Hadith says that that is the narration of Sunni scholars. Not they just do not want to touch Shia narrations about Saqifa and what happened after the martyrdom of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Here, Al-Waqidi says the same thing, and he is even he knows this kind of blackmailing strategy that their scholars had at that time. This is the 2nd century, so to speak, and 3rd century, early 3rd century, because Waqidi passed away in the year 207. So even at that time, the scholars of his time, they had this blackmailing strategy to blackmail whoever, weaken whoever narrates some details about the incidents of the early Islamic caliphate and so on, that which was in clash with their ideology of justice of Sahaba, justice of companions of the Prophet. So, and he just says to his student, so be careful. This is okay. I've narrated these from our scholars, and I don't want to add anything of the Rafidha, because then you will be accused of being Shia or Rafidi or so on yourself. So that's the part about Saqifa, and then he goes on. The rest of the book is about the wars of the apostates, the Riddah wars, and so on, the details and so on. So interestingly, we will also touch upon some statements of their scholars about Al-Waqidi also. Here we have, for example, briefly, however, here we have Yaqut al-Hamdi again in his book Mu'jam al-Udaba, volume 6, page 2597 to 2598. He mentions Al-Waqidi and says, Ahadu awiyat al-ilm, one of the containers of knowledge, who had an abundant amount of knowledge and information, وصاحب التصانيف الكثيرة, and he was a owner of many books, and he has heard narrations from Malik ibn Anas and Al-Thawri and Ma'mar ibn Rashid and Ibn Abi Zayd and others, and mentions also those who have narrated from him, and also mentions that Muhammad ibn Sa'd, the famous author of the Tabaqat ibn Sa'd, it was his khatib, was his writer. So, mentions also that he was knowledgeable about the opinions of Malik and Sufyan al-Thawri. So he was also knowledgeable in the fields of fiqh, as their scholars have said. And then it says that, quotes Abu Dawud al-Hafiz, that from Ibn al-Madini, Ali ibn al-Madini, who said that Waqidi was used to narrate like 30,000 gharib narrations, meaning rare narrations that you wouldn't find in other places too often. So he had very, very vast knowledge. وكان إلى حفظه المنتهى في المغازي والسير والأخبار وأيام الناس والبقاع والفقه وغير ذلك. And his memory was just ultimate in the fields of Maghazi and also history, siyar, history of caliphates and so on, and also about fiqh. So he had a very deep knowledge and roots in those fields. And also mentions that Waqidi has narrated from some scholars like Ibn Jurayj and Ma'mar and Thawr ibn Yazid and so on. And then quotes Imam Ibrahim al-Harbi, who said, Al-Waqidi Aminul Islam al-Islam. Waqidi is the trustee of people upon Islam. So people can trust their Islam by taking narration from Waqidi. And then says that, quotes Bukhari, who said, Sakatu anhu, yani, the scholars have been silent about him, his status. And then quotes Muhammad ibn Ishaq, by Allah, lawla indi annahu indi saqa ma haddatha anhu. that he says, by Allah, if Al-Waqidi was not trustworthy, in my opinion, I wouldn't have narrated from him narrations. And then quotes Mus'ab ibn Zubair, who said that by Allah, I haven't seen someone like Al-Waqidi, and also said that Waqidi is thiqatun ma'mun, was a trusted, reliable, trustworthy, reliable scholar, narrator. And then also again from Ibrahim al-Harbi who said that whoever says that the Masail of Ahmad and Ibn Abi Zayd has been taken or narrated from a more trustworthy scholar than Al-Waqidi, then don't trust him. So the most trustworthy narrator who have narrated the Masail of Ahmad and Ibn Abi Zayd is Al-Waqidi, according to Ibrahim al-Harbi. And also mentions Darawardi, who said that Al-Waqidi Amir al-Mu'minin fil Hadith. Al-Waqidi is a commander of the faithful, Amir al-Mu'minin in the field of Hadith. Is not just a regular narrator or scholar. And also quotes Muhammad ibn Salam al-Jumahi, who said Al-Waqidi alamu dahrihi. Waqidi was the scholar of his time, was the top scholar of his time, so to speak. And Jabir ibn Kurdi said, I heard Yazid ibn Harun saying Waqidi is trustworthy. And also Abu Ubaid al-Qasim ibn Salam, the famous scholar who has written many books in the fields of Qur'an and other fields, has also deemed Al-Waqidi trustworthy. And then the author of this book, Yaqut al-Amwi, says, وهو مع ذلك ضعفه طائفة من المحدثين كابن معين وابن أبي حاتم والنسائي وابن عدي وابن راهوي والدارقطني. And he says that despite all these praises of these scholars that he mentions, a group of scholars of hadith have weakened Al-Waqidi also. The likes of Ibn Ma'in, Abi Hatim, Nasahi, Ibn Adi, and Ibn Rahawi, and also Darqutni. And then Yaqut al-Hamwi says, أما في أخبار الناس والسير والفقه وسائر الفنون فهو ثقة بالإجماع. He says, however, in the fields of history of people and siyar and sira and fiqh, and some of other of these fields, Waqidi is trustworthy by consensus. So there are some fields like history and sira and so on. Waqidi is thiqa, is trustworthy by consensus, Yaqut al-Hamwi says. And then says that Rashid used to put him in charge of being the judge in the east of Baghdad, and then also Ma'mun put him in charge of as judge in Askar al-Mahdi, and also used to respect him and so on, revere him a lot. And then mentions the books that Al-Waqidi has written, and he says that after mentioning the year that he was born and passed away, he says he was born in the year 130 and he passed away in the year 207, and then says that from among his books are a book about Ikhtilaf of Ahl al-Madinah wa Kufa, about some fields of fiqh, and then another book, Ghalat al-Hadith, which is mistakes in hadith, another book, As-Sunnah wa Jama'ah wa Zamm al-Hawa, another book, Zikr al-Qur'an, another book, Al-Adab, another book, At-Targhib fi Ilm al-Qur'an, another big book about Tarikh, about history, and another book about Tarikh wal-Maghazi wal-Ba'ath, and which is has been printed nowadays as it's known as Maghazi of Al-Waqidi. And also another book, Akhbar Mecca, History of Mecca, another book, the Fives of the Prophet, another book, the Death of the Prophet, another book, As-Saqifa wa Bay'at Abi Bakr. He had a particular dedicated book about Saqifa and allegiance of Abi Bakr. Where is that book? We don't know. It's also from among those books which is lost. Like we have mentioned, like the book of Saqifa of Umar ibn Shabbah, the other famous historian that we mentioned last time, also missing. So a lot of books of Saqifa have been missing, very interestingly. So he had a particular book about, as here it's Yaqut al-Hamwi mentions, he had a particular book about Saqifa and Bayat of Abi Bakr, and also Sirah of Abi Bakr, and also a book of Riddah, which is this book that we just quoted a narration about Saqifa from it. Which here it says book of Riddah and Dar, which means the attack on the house of Uthman. However, some scholars have said that those are two books. Dar is a different book from Riddah, but yeah, here it mentions that both of them are one book. And also book of Sirah, another book about Habish of a Fil, and some other books about the Battle of Jamal Siffin, the birth of Imam al-Hasan and al-Hussein, and the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein, and so on, and some other books in these fields. Yeah, so we see a lot of books that have been written by Al-Waqidi, and also importantly books about Saqifa in particular, and also this book at Riddah that we have read a narration about Saqifa from it. So we have here also another scholar, Salafi scholar, Ibn Kathir, he mentions about Al-Waqidi. He says, وَالْوَاقِدِ إِنْدَهُ زِيَادَاتْ حَسَنَةٍ in his book Al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya, volume 4, page 580, says that Waqidi has some good additions, some useful additions in his book. وَتَارِيخٌ مُحَرَّرٌ غَالِبًا, and he has a history which is objective most of the time. So, or maybe it's Muharrar means sometimes also maybe from Tahrir, or which is written history. But I think he means that he is more open in his recording. History is more objective. فإنه من أئمة هذا الشأن الكبار, because Waqidi was from the imams of this field, from the great imams. A'imma al-kibar, he says, Ibn Kathir. And Ibn Kathir is a Salafi. So Waqidi was a great imam of this field of tarikh, field of history. وهو صدوق في نفسه مكثار, which means he was truthful in himself. He himself was truthful. Mikthar. He used to narrate huge number of narrations. He had a very huge archive of narrations. And then he says that about authentication and weakening of him, I have mentioned it in detail in my other book called Al-Takmil and so on. But here he mentions in the field of Tariq, he says that he was A'imma. He was from the A'immat al-Kibar. So as Yaqut al-Hamwi mentioned, in the field of history, he's a reliable. So he's someone that they take narrations from him, reports about history, and rely on him mostly on these fields. And also Dhahabi says about him that Al-Waqidi وإن كان لا نزاع في ضعفه فهو صادق اللسان كبير القدر, which means Waqidi was, even though there is no dispute about his weakness, that many of their scholars of hadith have weakened him, however, he was sadiq al-lisan. He was truthful in his tongue, and a person of great status. He was a great scholar. And likewise, there are many other scholars who say the same thing, that they rely upon his narrations in the fields of history and maghazi and so on. In any case, I just wanted to mention this important narration because it has some interesting details, and we have mentioned also authentic narrations before. Sayyid Ali actually in one of the first shows mentioned that Amir al-Mu'minin Islam always used to say that he was more deserving of the successorship of the Prophet than Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and others. Here we just got a confirmation with some more details about what happened and what was the arguments of Amir al-Mu'minin and some other people. Yeah, thank you very much. I think if you have some questions, maybe, otherwise I will leave it to you.
That is really helpful to put everything into context. So the context to the events that took place are this struggle, this disagreement based on the caliphate and the successorship to the Prophet, which actually frames the events and gives some insight as to why this event took place. Dear viewers, again, I'll speak to you directly. It's for you to decide from the material that's been provided today and in the past, but especially today. You've heard the learned Sayyids explaining the context behind this event, where people turned up to the door of the daughter of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon her, and committed an act of terrorism. Now that you know the backstory to this, that it was actually a dispute on the caliphate, and you had a fledgling autocratic fascist caliph who'd managed to conduct a coup d'etat, basically, and put himself into power, consolidating his power by overcoming his opposition, eliminating or neutralizing anyone who would be able to challenge his authority. So that is the backdrop to this. And we have the motive as to why people like Farid Bahraini would want to minimize or to obfuscate the events that have taken place. This approach by Farid, this Faridology, where trying to lie, twist, distort the truth and facts to save the collective integrity of the companions of the Prophet and try and show that there was no disagreement between them, has led him to disregard evidence on both sides, both Shia and Sunni sides. Now, whenever you have a dispute, you will have two or more opposing factions or parties. And as you can see here, on the one hand, you've got Abu Bakr and the companions, and on the other side, you've got the family of the Prophet, the Prophet's daughter, Mawla Ali alayhi salam, and other companions, less in number, but who were sympathetic to Amir al-Mu'minin Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam's cause. Whenever you have a dispute like this, and there is an event, you will always find that there will be various testimonies. When people relate an event, when they witness something, not everybody has the same perspective. So somebody will focus on one aspect of what has happened, and another will actually either mention that very briefly, not mention it, and mention something else. It doesn't mean that both events are wrong. It means that people are focused on different aspects. Now, what we see from this narration and from the narrations that have been given in the past is people turned up to the door of the daughter of the Prophet. They had fire with them. There were threats made to burn the house down. And there was injury caused to the daughter of the Prophet. Now, Sayyid Ali mentioned something extremely important earlier when he was talking, and that was inductive reasoning. I'll try and explain that to you a little more. Inductive reasoning is used in science, in philosophy, in psychology, in maths. It's actually a rule where if you have some facts, so for example, if you, let's talk about criminal law, because we are talking about what would in this day and age be a criminal act and something that would be established from facts. So if you had an unsavory character hanging around outside somebody's home, with a can of petrol and some matches. And then the home burnt down in unexplained circumstances, but nobody saw the act being done. It would be inductive reasoning to assume that that person who had the means to carry out this act had actually carried out that act. If that person had been making threats, that would only strengthen that inductive reasoning. So we have here reports both from Shia sources and, more importantly, from Sunni sources, from Tabi, from various Tabi, that Umar came to the door of Sayyidah Fatima Salamullah Alaiha. He actually threatened to burn the door down. He had fire with him. He had people with him, and he actually made the threat that he was going to be burning the door. If you're going to be sat on a jury and you have these facts presented to you, it would be extremely surprising if you did not conclude that the person at the door had actually committed the act he was saying he was going to do. This is why, from the facts, we can draw the conclusion that when Umar came to the door of Sayyidah Fatima Salamullah Alaiha, he actually carried out his threat. We can draw a hypothesis that, or we can formulate a theory, a hypothesis that what in fact did occur was that after threatening to do this absolutely heinous act, Umar in fact did commit this act, caused injury to the Al-Bayt, and set fire to the door and broke into the house of the daughter of the Prophet. Now, we have reports from the Al-Bayt which actually testify to this. What we don't have is any report to the contrary. So we do not have any report in any Shia or Sunni source which says that the event at the door did not take place. And you've got to remember that the people that we've been talking about, Baladhuri and the other narrators we were mentioning, including Waqidi, were actually alive during the times of the Shia Imams. Now, if they were writing these events and they've actually specified this has occurred, that there is no evidence that they came to the Al-Bayt, the descendants of the Prophet, and said, did this event take place? And they received an answer which was against these reports. These reports have not been denied or proven wrong by either the Shia or the Sunni. Leave Farid to one side. He's an absolute no one when it comes to Sunni academia and historical references. So what we have is a number of narrators, actually quite a large number of narrators. Not only were the Tabi'in, but they were quite renowned as scholars themselves, and then successive generations of quite authoritative historians and scholars and authors in the Sunni academic world who have actually said that this event has taken place. A large number of scholars and historians recounting these events, transmitting this event, and recording this event in their works, which is then supported by other historians and scholars who are relying on different chains to actually verify this account, and who are all saying that this event took place. Yet we have Farid, who wants us to believe that either these renowned Sunni scholars and historians are Shia, or that they're weak, or that they're unknown, or that they are unreliable, all because of his ideological belief that he has to try and hide by whatever means necessary any dispute amongst the Sahaba, and to try and show that they were all friendly, hunky-dory, lovey-dovey, with no disputes amongst them whatsoever, which is an absolutely ridiculous
position to have. History is full of events which show that the companions fought each other, killed each other, swore at each other. Who's Farid trying to fool by saying that these events didn't take place? And the character of some of these companions is evident in Sunni works. Umar's personality is quite apparent from the biographies that have been written by Sunni scholars. You have a misogynist here, somebody who has a dislike for women. So the conundrum before you is basically this. On the one hand, you have a dispute, and a dispute which is evidenced throughout numerous reports, regardless of which side of the divide you sit on. And on the other hand, you have this Faridology, which is trying to get you to ignore all the evidence and believe nothing happened, and everyone who's trying to say something happened is somehow either a Shia, unknown, unreliable, or just simply lying. Who would you believe? And I will leave you with this thought and this question. And inshallah, those who seek the truth sincerely will find the truth and will come to the conclusion that, in fact, it was, based on all the evidences that have been provided so far, it was Umar who came to the house of the daughter of the Prophet, Sayyidah Fatima Salamullah alayha, set the door on fire and broke into the house. Inshallah, you will reach the truth, and when you are held to account, you will be able to confirm that you stood with the truth. I leave you with this, and inshallah, we will see you again soon. So it's Allah Hafiz from me, Nazim, Kazmi, and everyone at Bayt al-Ghadir. Thank you for listening.